Okay, good morning to all of you. And today we are starting another session. Actually, there are two sessions under planning process. Now, planning is the initial stage of overall management process. So traditionally, it was considered as a function, but we prefer to consider it as a process. So, what is a difference between a function and a process? Function is a top-down flow in order to deliver or achieve the outcome of a given uh, line of activities or called activity function. That is top down. Process is horizontal or left right. It's a flow. So it process actually continues through various stages of activities, line of activities, various, in other words, various functions. So in a function, you will have bosses and subordinates, but in a process, you will identify supplier and customer. So now organizations prefer to have processes that actually deliver the final value, being customer driven. That's why new organizations under their restructuring and reengineering, they're streamlining all their functional activities to process that ultimately make sure that what is needed by the customer is produced at the end of the day. So the discussion about function versus process is an alternative discussion. Um, and you can have a lengthy discussion even on that topic. But to introduce it as a planning process, I just wanted to highlight what function and process were. Okay. Now, with that brief understanding about planning process or process view and functional view, we have to understand what planning process is. Now, I'm trying to cover this session based on few questions. What should we know under planning? First thing is, how do managers plan? That's important. And the second question is, what type of plans do managers use? What are the useful planning tools and techniques? What is the control process? And what are the common organizational controls? Actually, the control process is linked with planning. Planning and control goes together. That's why I have considered as a second part of this discussion the control. But in the management process, we separately identify planning, organizing, directing, and controlling as a separate entity. But it is a flow of planning, because without a planning, you can't control. That is the reason I consider control also. But I will take another session to talk about control specifically. Okay, let's start our discussion here. How do managers plan? Now, that's an important question to understand how managers plan. Before explaining how managers plan, that means the overall process of planning, we have to understand some key terms of planning process. Plan and planning, two different things. And then objectives, strategies, policies, procedures. Okay, these are the keywords. What do you mean by planning? Planning is an activity, doing activity. What do you do under planning? Initially, you set objectives and determine how to get there. Two things are included in planning mainly: what to be achieved and how to get there or how to be achieved. If you decide what to be achieved, maybe in the shorter term, mid-term, or longer term, and how to get there, meaning the ways of achieving it, ways of delivering it, in other words, strategies, and other guidelines. When you say how to get there, when you answer how to get there, the question of how to get there, how to achieve there, you have to have a way forward for shorter term, mid-term, and longer term, and also some guiding protocols. We call them as policies. So planning basically is the process of deciding where to go and how to go, or what to achieve, or how to achieve. There you have objectives and the plan. Plan provides how to go there mainly. Now, what do you mean by objectives or goals? Now, there are different terms that we use: objectives, goals, and then milestones, right? So, there are different occasions of using these words: milestones, objectives, and goals. At the same time, there is a purpose, special purposes of using those words in particular event situations. For example, when you say milestone, it's a generic word, and also um, in management also we use it. Milestones are minor level achievements that are not end level achievements, but that shows whether what we achieve is in the right path or not. So halfway through achievements are considered as milestones. That means if we talk about milestones, that means there are some more to achieve. There is a journey ahead, right? If you are trying to achieve something in the halfway through, when you are in the middle of a journey where you have to achieve more, then we call milestones. Mostly those are shorter term. Objectives are end result. Mainly, we're talking objectives when it comes to a shorter term and mid-term uh, proposals and plans. Even it is used in longer term aspects also, but those are specific end destinies or end status of achievement, what to be achieved at the end after doing something. That is an objective. But what about a goal? Goal, mostly people say, and even we can generally accept, goals are a little bit compared to objectives longer term. And none other than that difference of time, but even the specificity. Objectives are very specifically mentioned. Goals are a little bit abstract compared to objectives. They are not very much specific on goals, uh, like what you maintain or what you do when it comes to objectives. So goals are longer term expectations, desires, right? And the nature of achievements. So, mostly we talk about goals in long term strategic planning. But in management, we prefer to deal with objectives because we know objectives represents what you achieve at the end of the day in a very specific manner, right? So, I just wanted to explain the different terms. What do you mean by milestones, objectives, and goals? In some cases, you can, in practically also, people use these words interchangeably, right, to express the same meaning. But if you want to specifically highlight the differences, this is how you can differentiate among these words. Okay, plan consists of objectives. Objectives are the specific results or desired outcomes that one intend to achieve. As I mentioned, end state. Objectives are the critical part of planning. And then the other segment is plan. The plan denotes a set of action steps to be taken in order to accomplish the objective. So once you set an objective, how do you achieve them? How do you get there? What are the actions to be taken? What are the actions to be implemented? So if you have a statement of actions to be implemented, then you would have a plan. So objectives and plan together comes, and then we identify that as a, a planning initiative. So when you develop a plan, definitely you would have objectives and also how to go there. The actions are there. And further, this can be made very specific by introducing timing, by introducing resources required, budget, responsibilities, and so forth. Then it becomes very specific scheduling, operational planning, something like that, right? So the key three things that we have to understand: planning is a process of setting objectives and plan or how to get there. Plan is the specific achievements, objectives are the specific achievements, and the plans are the action steps, statement of action steps that actually um, direct, that are directed to achieve uh, some set of objectives, right? And I mentioned about policies. So I'm dealing with policies later, but here, when you say policies, mainly policies, again, that can be shorter term, mid term, or longer term, but policies mainly longer term concepts because it guide decision making. So policies are guiding protocols of how to make decisions. How to make decisions. That's important to understand. Why do you want policies? Because once you set a dream or objective or a action steps, set of action steps, you have to have some way of doing it. So that's why you need a top policy. For an example, suppose that you start a new organization, right? So you planning your in your planning, you have to have a ultimate desire where to go that we call vision. Vision is uh, the purpose of the overall processes activities. At the end of the day, ultimately, in the long run, why you have started this, what you want to be doing all these things. That is that's oh, a future that you see by undertaking a business. When it comes to a business, that is how you explain a vision. So once you have a vision, there should be a bigger path how to go there that we call mission. So once you have a mission, then in implementing that mission, you have to have your goals, longer term objectives, and very specific objectives, and then how to go there. That means strategies or plans. That's how the planning starts: vision, mission, right? Goals, objectives, and then strategies or action steps, right? So policies are set as guiding protocols in each and every steps. Now, when you have a vision, you have to ask, how do you go there? Then you have to have a mission. Then when you have a mission path, then people ask, how do you implement the mission? And then you will come up with decision guidelines, long-term policies. Okay, the policy comes there. Another stage where policy comes is when you set objectives and action steps of achieving objectives, people ask how to set objectives and how to implement those action steps. There will be another set of guidelines, and their policy implicates again. As I earlier mentioned, if you very specifically schedule your each and every activity, then there also you would have to have how to do each and every minor activities. Then there are also you will have some guidelines. We are not going to call them as policies, we call them as procedures. If each and every activities are detailed enough on how to carry them out, then it becomes a procedure. It's also a guideline, very shorter term. That's why it becomes a procedure. But when it comes to a guideline that actually direct your longer term or relative longer term activities, then we identify them as policies. Now I explain what vision mission is, and then what planning objective plans are, and even policies and procedures, right? So with that understanding, we try to answer the first question: how do managers plan? Okay, I'll explain that using a example also, because you need the practical understanding. I explain now, you want to start a new business. Suppose that you are trying to provide organic fertilizer. So you are starting a company, organic fertilizer. What is your vision? Your vision is to become, uh, forget about being number one, right, in the South Asia or else in the world. Just focus on in Sri Lanka, because we have a lot of things to do in Sri Lanka when it comes to organic fertilizer. So you want to be the number one quality organic fertilizer provider, right? So that the country get prospered with organic agriculture. So you want people to eat vegetables and fruits that use organic fertilizer. That's your vision. It's a dream. And the mission path is what? You have to have a path. Mission is a path. There would be alternative paths of going there. One path is, okay, you want your people in the country to enjoy fruits and vegetables cultivated using organic fertilizer. One path is importing good organic from whatever the countries, and then make sure you become the number one dealer and you deliver all good organic fertilizer to all vegetable and fruits, farmers. That's one path. And another path is you become a producer. You want to produce your own organic and deliver that to farmers. That is another path. Now, when it comes to producing, and there are different ways, you may use some sort of, the ingredients, raw materials. Based on the raw materials, also, you can be differentiated. Your path is to produce this organic using, the traditional formulas of making organic fertilizer. That's one path. Another path is to use the latest scientific uh, findings of making organic fertilizer. Now, you see, to become the number one organic fertilizer provider in the country, you have different paths. Those are called missions. So you opt to one mission. Suppose you are not going to be importing, not going to import them, or you produce, but you using not the latest scientific findings, but the traditional formulas of making organic fertilizer. That is your business. Now you identify the mission. Then what is your objective? Then you have to have your goals. So you set a goal. Within next 5 year time, I you would have a goal. Okay, within next 5 year time, I'll provide traditional organic fertilizer to two-third of countries paddy farmers, right? That's a goal. And then you have to have Objectives, mostly shorter term, 1 year time. How do you go there? And then first year, you would say, I start uh, organic fertilizer production plant. I train organic fertilizer raw material collectors, right? And then another blah blah blah. Those are objectives to be achieved within a next coming couple of months or 1 year. Now you have the vision, mission, goal, and now objective. Where is this strategies? Action step. Look at the objective number one. What is the objective number one? To plant, to have the establish your organic fertilizer plant. What are the action steps? Um, One thing is action steps would be um, find all sources of organic fertilizer raw materials. Maybe you use a lot of tree based sources and also animal based sources. You One action is to collect as many sources as possible that actually give this raw material. That is one action. And then develop effective competitive relationship between these suppliers. Number three, facilitate the suppliers to continuous supply. Number four, uh, I mean, uh, enhancing the processing effectiveness or efficiency of this all collected organic fertilizer raw materials in the uh, in your plant, right? And then blah blah blah. You will come up with some sort of other actions, activities in order to establish your organic fertilizer manufacturing plant, right? By the end of this coming year. So now you see you have the vision, mission, goals, objectives, and also the plans, action steps, or strategies. There would you would have some policies, guidelines. What are the policies? One policy is never use chemicals in the manufacturing process, right? And then you will have a policies of collecting suppliers. Never collect or do not find suppliers who use polythene or plastics or whatever mixed sources that contain some chemicals. You avoid those things. So your policy is to go pure organic production. That is another policy guideline. Now, when you have these two policy guidelines, so you won't go to suppliers who supplies the mixed sources of raw materials for your organic fertilizer. So you omit them, you avoid them, and you find the real, genuine suppliers who provide the real organic raw materials. Now, look at this. This policy made you differentiate your decisions, right? So this is the importance of having policies. You can do the same thing in a different way, but which way you want to do, there should be a classic way that maybe sometimes the environment likes, customer like, community like, or you personally like, right? So that is how you have to do that, right? Now I explained vision, mission, goals, objectives, policies, everything using an example. Now you have a very good understanding about the background context of planning. Now we'll move on to the first question: how do managers plan? So there are a few steps. As I earlier mentioned, define your objectives. Now defining objectives should always be in line with your vision and mission, right? So better to have a first step of planning as decide your vision and mission statement, right? What do you want to be, right? And then which path you want to move on, and based on that, look at your main goals, right? That is the first stage. Once you have this vision, mission, and what you want to be in the future, the longer term, then you have to decide your objectives or goals. Maybe you will have longer term goals, you will have midterm and the short term objectives, right? The defining whether to say, rather saying objectives, say defining your achievements. Achievements, if it is very shorter term, can be milestones or objectives or goals, midterm goals or longer term goals. So defining, you first stage is what you want to achieve. Define your achievements. And the second stage is determine where you stand vis-a-vis objective. What does it mean? Now, once you have a achievements or objective or a goal, whatever you intend, you when you set whatever you intended to achieve, then compare where are you now in achieving the objective, right? Are you at a zero level, or a little bit far away compared to zero level? So, what is the gap? Look at that, right? So suppose that I'm having a today organic fertilizer farm uh, plant, but I'm just catering only to one district. But I want to your target is to be number one in the country, but for next 5 years you want to just provide, you want to be the lead in the western province or else whatever other provinces, right? Or some part of the country. So you decide that as the objective, and then look at how where you're staying now currently. So you're producing organic fertilizer only to Gampar district, but I want to make it to all western province. So you identify your gap, and then not only in that way, in all ways you have to assess, right, where you are and what more you have to do in achieving the objective, right? Once you identify, we call them as gaps or what to be done further, right? um, when comparing your expectation versus your actual situation, that is what you do at stage number two. And stage number three is develop premises regarding future conditions. What do you mean by develop premises? Now, once you identify where you are and what to be achieved, and look at the conditions of the environment, what would be in the future, right? So based on the conditions in the future, then you have to decide, right, what to be done. You are not going to cater to the whole rest of the western province except Gampa district within next year. Why? Within next year, uh, though you are really willing to do that, there are some restrictions. One restriction is maybe considering the today's economic crisis, farmers may have problems of cultivating or using all lands because of inflation and the cost of you know agriculture. Therefore, you predict based on these prevailing conditions, two-thirds of the farmers will not cultivate next year. So is it okay for you to just focus about all two-thirds of, or else the rest of the areas in the western province? No. Why? If you plan for that, definitely there would be a in excess production of your fertilizer, because now farmers are not fully utilizing their capacity, right? So this is a conditional situation. Once you predict the environmental situation, that's why we did the environmental analysis, right? So based on that, we identify the conditions. Based on the conditions, then you decide where and what, how much you have to do, right? You're deciding, yes, I'm only catering to one district in the western province, right? Another two-thirds of the areas to be covered, but I'm not going to cover two-thirds of areas, though I am in a position to cover within next year time. Why? Farmers are not willing to. There is a kind of a pattern. Farmers may leave from the cultivation. In that case, you decide next year I will focus to add only the other two district, right? Or something like that. Oh, one district, one district in the western province, right? Uh, to expand my organic fertilizer. So once you identify your expectation and where you are, comparing the environmental conditions, now you set your premises, right? This is, in other words, capacity level or operational level. That is the third stage. So once you set what to do, so in other words, suppose that two-third of market is there for you, but you are not going to operate within next year to capture that two-third of market. You will focus only one-third of market, so that keeping the one-third of another market, right, to be accessed later, due to some future reasons, right? That is the decision you made at the level 3, right? And once you've done those aspect, now you have the vision mission, you have the goals, objectives, you compared, you have decided where you are now, and you have decided your future operating level, and now analyze and choose among action alternatives. Now you consider your strategies, how you are going to do that, how you are going to do that, right? Now, although there is a two-third of market, you are going to operate one-third of market next year, right? Then you decide how to do that. How to do that. You're coming up with the action steps, other strategies. So deciding the strategies of um, implementing the set realistic objectives is the fourth step. Right now, you have your vision, mission, your goals, objectives. You know where you are, your gaps, and you decided your next operating capacity level based on the environmental conditions. And now you have decided your strategies as well, right? And then the next stage is implement the plan. Implement the plan. It is very much important to make sure that each and every action steps is implemented during the future planning period, right? So you have to commit your resources, people, and facilitate, right? Everything. It's a huge task. And then the last stage is evaluating, monitoring, controlling. Why? Once you have the plan and once you implement it, make sure that all what you plan is carried out smoothly. That is number one. Uh, uh, you know, action you have to do once you implement. Monitor. We call monitor, and you have to assess whether you are in the right path of achieving your big objectives that you set in the early stages here, right? So if it is not, if you are deviating from what you really wanted to be, then you have to take some corrective actions. That's why the controlling and monitoring is important. Now, even after implementing everything at the end of the planning period, you have to again reassess whether what you intended and what you have really achieved is in line, or what where you have gone wrong. What is the reason for those things? How do you correct them? So this discussion comes at the latter part, right? Under controlling. Now the planning process involves vision, mission, uh, decision, and then the goals, objective setting, and then assessing your current position against the expectation, and then deciding the future operation level based on the environment analysis, and then in order to achieve the objectives, what strategies to be implemented, you decide the strategic set, and then you implement the plan, and then you monitor and control, right? It doesn't mean that these are sequentially done, right? Sequentially done. So simultaneously, some activities tasks are done, but for learning purpose, we have to just provide a kind of a sequence of activities that we do under planning process. Now we answered the first question: how managers do planning? How do managers plan? We answered that question. Now this is a very important. Now in past papers also, I have asked few questions about especially what planning is, what is the difference between objectives and plans, right? And then uh, um, what is the strategy. So those things, preliminary things based on a discussion. And then I usually frequently I have asked what the planning process, right? I sometimes use the word explain the planning process, or else sometimes I give a kind of a mini situation, right? Practical scenario, real scenario, or a imagined scenario, and ask you a question. Basically, the questions leads to, right? Uh, you think lead to think you about the steps of planning process. Planning process. You have to first understand the question, right? Uh, and then write the answer. The planning process is blah 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 blah, as I explained now. Okay, right. What is the second point? Now this is a kind of a discussion to highlight the importance of planning and control in management process, right? So when I ask a question, the importance of planning and controlling, then you have to relate this figure, right? Now look at this picture. Planning is basically to set the direction. Now to lead, to control, and to organize, there should be a direction where to go and how to go there. So planning does this. So the role of planning or importance of planning in management is planning set the direction, decide where to go, right? And also how to go there. So without direction, you can't start the management process. So so the direction for management and organization is given by planning. That's the importance of planning. And when it comes to leading, now suppose that you lead people, there is a question. What is the question? Where to lead these people? What do you ask people to do? To kill someone, or to safeguard someone, or to do something else? So there should be a direction. So the inspiration is decided based on the plan, goals, and strategies, right? So to inspire leading effort, right? Planning is important. Without planning, you can't direct people, right? So that is another importance of planning, because planning inspire leading. What about controlling? Controlling is to ensure whether you achieve results or not. Important process of planning. Now I mentioned without standard, without objective, without strategies, how do you set criteria? How do you set measurements? How do you control? Nothing will happen, right? So whether to understand you are in the right path or not, to compare your actual result, you have to have your intended expectation, objectives, and plans. So the planning provides comparison to controlling process. Planning provides basis to set standards, controlling standards, and measures in the controlling process. So that is the importance of planning to controlling, right? And how planning help organizing? Organizing is basically to create structures and prepare organizational atmosphere, right? You prepare the platform within the organization to implement plans, right? And there you have to recruit people, you have to cluster departments, activities, teams, create job designing. You have to create the communication channels, reporting styles. You have to allocate duties, tasks. You have to allocate responsibilities and power. So these all tasks we consider as organizing. There's one question. Question is, you have to rationalize when you cluster people into production, marketing, and blah blah blah. When you cluster your resources and other facilities into these segments, or else when you delegate responsibilities to different people and different sections or departments, then there should be a rationale. Why do you do that? For what? Then the question is, you are doing this responsibility delegation or is a power delegation, or is you are clustering the activities and people into different departments because you have the plans to achieve, because of this objective, to achieve this objective and to implement this particular strategy, you have to have people at this place with the right power and the responsibility, empowered with the right level of resources, right? So justification comes with the planning. So the importance of planning in organizing is, organizing activity is rationalized and justified by planning, right? Now, planning is very much important in overall management process. Right. Still, we talk about how do managers do planning. Now, what are the benefits of planning? Very, you even can grab some points from the two dis I mean the discussions I just made a few while ago. But based on that, right, um, we can actually think about some other benefits also. Now, just imagine there is no planning, but still you have to do something with some resources. How would you feel? Hmm? How would you feel? So you do this and that everything with your resources. Ultimately, you will end up wasting your money, resources, and the time. Meaning what? If you don't have a plan, you won't have a focus. If you have a plan, you can focus. Okay, these resources, and I am here with these facilities because to achieve that objective and implement that strategy. So planning gives you focus, right? And at the same time, flexibility. Now, people say if you have a plan, you won't flexible enough. No, the flexibility means, suppose that if you know what to do, and then you have to strategically adjust your resources. For an example, suppose that you want to go to PETA now, from Kalani University to PETA station, right? So you planned, you come out of the university and you are now waiting at the bus station. Now you suddenly get to know there is a huge demonstration, strike, right, on the road near this flyover, the Mutakoda flyover. So buses are not going. Now what do you do? What do you do? So you also join the demonstration, right? If you don't have a focus, but you have a plan now to go to PETA, right? Now you will find, okay, I cannot go by this, whatever this flyover. So I go to the train station. Where is train station? In the regular train station from California University. If you just take a taxi, right, the other side to Vattala area. So from 2 kilometers, we will have the intermodal station. From the station, you get the train, and from the train, you can bypass the flyover and go to PETA. Now, what is this? This is flexibility. You use your resources, time, everything, right, in a more flexible manner. This option, if you fail this option, you go for another option because you had a plan. That's why I said planning improve focus and flexibility. And the second benefit of planning is improve action orientation, right? So each and every steps of your action is justified against objective that you need to achieve, right? If someone asks, why do you do this? Right. Now there was a small, during our younger time also there was a television TV advertisement. Um, මොනවද මොකටද සීයේ බිම හරන්නේ, right? Can you remember that? So the small kid is asking from his grandfather, why he's digging out the right, uh, uh, using whatever the things, why he's making a kind of a pothole there, right? Why he's digging, right? And then that grandfather is answering, "Mamala meo me ambeyak situmi. Ame ambeyak hitawande yanne." What does it mean? So the grandfather is thinking about the future of the kids, right? So that he has a great purpose. In order to justify that purpose, he's now doing a small sort of activity. So activity is justified. The action is why he's digging out, because to achieve that objective. So each and every activity is justified because you have now the objective in the mind, right? So that is a very big important importance of having a planning, right? Each and every organization, why you should come early, why should you should not leave early, why should you should be motivated, why should you put your maximum effort within the organization. Everything is justified because you have the objective in your mind, right? Organizations who are sharing the company vision, mission, and objectives have the right sort of behavior, because the behavior, they have opted to that behavior because of that objective. They're living in that objective. Organizations where people don't have any idea about the vision, mission, objectives, what to achieve, and they kill their time, right? Their time and also organization resources. Ultimately, uh, doing nothing, right? That is one of the issue of Sri Lanka's most, loss-making entities in the country. So improve action orientation is another benefit of planning. Improve coordination. That's important discussion. Improve coordination. Now planning, now you remember I explained organizing, delegating powers, resources, designing jobs, designing departments, activities, and everything is based on the objectives. So the coordination among departments, work, task, team, everything is coordinated, ultimately achieve the final objective. So if you don't have an objective, you cannot be coordinated well. A simple example again, suppose that you are working in a garment factory, right? You see, garment factory, MD is there, general manager is there, productions, and all others are functioning, right? Someone is putting raw materials from one side, and someone is getting out the garments from one side, right? In between, you see the whole lot of activities are going on. People are engaged properly as planned, organized. Now, suppose a suddenly tsunami comes, right? This apparel company is situated or established closer to wherever the beach area, and now one tsunami comes, and suddenly, people, get shocked and unrest. What will happen now? What will happen? So all up to now, all people were working towards one objective, but now suddenly the environment changed, right? The people's goal committed mindset now vanished. Why? They had another goal. What is the goal? How to survive. Some people wants to how to find how to survive. Some people wants to go and see the tidal waves, how big they are, what is the color, blah blah blah, right? So different purposes comes into people's mind now. They lose their focus. They lose their focus. What will happen then? People just run away here and there, and then a lot of accidents. It's a huge mess and calamity. Why this mess was created? Because now there is no proper coordination. Why the coordination was lost? Because they don't have a now common goal, purpose, objective that was shattered by the outside whatever the occurrence. this time the tsunami, right? That's why it's important to have a proper coordination. Planning creates coordination. Improve time management. Yes, definitely. Planning, make sure each and every action is done right uh, with the efficient way. That means time management. And planning, as I already mentioned, planning is, in other words, is the control. When you set goals and objectives, and then it becomes the standards for control. When you set actions or strategies, on other hand, it becomes the measurements for controlling, right? So without planning, you can't control. These are the benefits, and you can highlight many other benefits, right? But I highlighted here or not. Okay. Now there is a kind of an example given for quality management. So this is basically control, how control happens. Now look at this corporate quality objective. If you have the quality objective like deliver error-free product, that means customer requirements 100% of the time. Now these standards, control standards came based on a objective. Manufacturing deviation quality objective. Now another objective. Become a preferred supplier by achieving 100% on-time delivery of all products. This is a quality measure or the control measure. This also has been based on the objective. Plant quality objective. Increase percent accepted by 16% to meet customers' delivery requirements. Right? So this is also a control measurement. And finally, shift supervisor quality objective. Assess capabilities of machine operators and provide range appropriate training. So at different stage, different places, different level of all overall operations, you have quality measures. And you always compare actual done with these standards, with these measurements, so that you have to understand, you can understand whether you are leading in the right way or you need some corrective actions. This is what we do under controlling. So the objectives here, the quality control or else the control measurements or standards mentioned here are actually coming from objectives. So that is the importance of objectives in controlling. Now we completed question number one, answering how do managers plan. We identified the management planning process and also the importance of planning process in the management, and then benefits of planning process to organization, right? The second question, what type of plans do managers use? Now you can remember I had a discussion at the initial stage saying objectives, goals, milestones, and then different plans, right? Now you have to understand, right, where different plans happens or plans are done, right? Where different plans are done, and at the same time, what are the differences that different plans, right, have that are done in different level in the organization, right? So plans and planning can be differentiated based on a few bases. One thing is time, right? Short range and long range plan. There are some short range plan. Short range plans 1 year or less, right? Long range plan 3 year or more. In between 1 year to 3 year, so we call them as intermediate range plan, or short term, long term, and mid term. So the plans can be differentiated based on that shorter term, longer term, mid term, or intermediate term plans, right? So give me a shorter term plan. Achieving, I mean, maintaining less than 2% employee turnover monthly ratio. That's a short term plan, right? Capturing market share by another 10%, right? Within next 3 years. That's a longer term plan, right? And then intermediate plan, upskilling companies' skill employee skills, right? During another 2 years time in order to help automation. That's the intermediate plan, right? Okay. And at the same time, people vary in their capability to deal efficiently with different time horizons. Some people, for an example, operational workers, machine operators, work study departments, team supervisors, those are working with shorter term period, right? And the senior managers, top level managers, they are bothering about longer term objectives and goals, right? Now you have directors, executives, heads of sections, senior managers. Those are top level managers. The top level people are really dealing with the longer term objectives and goals, right? And you will have mid level assistant managers and some executives, right? So we call mid level. So the mid level managers and mid level people look after the intermediate range plans, and the lower level or bottom level or operational level leaders like say supervisors, team leaders, right? Operational managers, right? Those are actually working with the shorter term plans. Now the other segment differentiation is strategic and operational. Earlier one is a time based, now is the strategic operational. Now, strategic plans set broad, comprehensive, and long term action directions for the entire organization. Now, you can remember, I mentioned setting a vision, mission, and then the longer term goals and strategies. So, that is actually for maybe 20 years' time, 10 years' time, 5 years' time organization's plan that is done basically by the top level under the strategic planning. So, this longer term plan we call the strategic plan, right? Strategic objectives and strategic uh, action sets. But the operational means what is really happening on the ground in the manufacturing flow. They are bothering about per minute, per second, per day, per week, per month operation outcome, right? So these plans and strategies we call operational plans. Define what needs to be done in specific areas to implement the strategic plans. Based on the strategic guidelines, they plan what to do. In between the operational and strategic plan, you would find the tactical plan, right? Now, organization's vision statement, longer term strategic plan are examples for strategic planning. Operation plan examples are production plan, financial plan, facility plan, marketing plan, human resource plan for next couple of months or next year. Those are operational plans. And the tactical plan is done by middle level management because they want to make sure that the strategic plans are implemented at operational level. There may be some intermediary, uh, you know, facilitation that is done by mid-term plan, right, or tactical plan. Okay, now you understood the types of planning, right, based on time and the based on uh, the levels of managers. Top level managers are doing strategic planning, and the bottom level managers are operational, mid level tactical planning. Now, other than these plans, there are some as I already mentioned, policies and procedures. There are standing policies, right, and also we call policies standing plans and policy. What does it mean? Standing plans means policies and procedures that are designed for repeated use. Now, there are some activities to be repeatedly done. So, all the time you have to make sure everything is happen in order to that routine. That is we call standing plans, right? For an example, plans how to run a machine. So, there is a procedure of how to run a machine, right? That we call standing plans. Now, policies Broad guidelines for making decisions and taking action specific circumstances. As I earlier mentioned, when you are making a decisions, there should be a guideline how to make a decisions. It actually does not explain how the decision is made. It explains how the decision should be made. For an example, if you are to do a disciplinary actions against employee, so each and every actions that explains the discipline, how to do discipline actions, is a standing plans, and that is also a procedure. But before you go for a discipline inquiry, what you should do, there would be policy, right? Report, maybe you may ask complaint. There should be a written complaint evidence, right? And filing the complaint properly, and then addressing uh, uh, approval by the management for inquiry, right? And then legal blah blah blah. So these are the guidelines, right? That are given in undertaking a disciplinary inquiry. This is the policy, right? And then the minor steps, as I earlier mentioned, if a decision step is explained one by one, then it becomes rules or procedures. Plans that describes exactly what actions are to be taken in specific situation. Now, in the disciplinary inquiry, how this disciplinary inquiry should be carried out. What is the step number A, B, C, D, blah blah blah. All steps are given explained in this disciplinary inquiry procedure or plan that we call a rule or procedure, right? Now, in organizations, we will have standing plans. Standing plan means uh, guidelines given or plans that are dedicated to repeatedly done activities. There we will identify policies and procedures. The policies and procedures and rules are examples for standing plans, right? Another type of plan we identified based on time, level of management, and then whether they are routinely done or not, standing plan, and now based on the purpose. So budgets and project schedules. Now the budget and project schedules are actually those are uh, coming under type of plans, operational plan, right? So single use plans, budget and project schedules under that we call only used once to meet the needs and objective of a well-defined situation in a timely manner. Now you may create budgets for routinely every day or every year circumstances, right? Other than that, we can have some one-time activity. For that, we will have a plan. We call that sort of plan as single-use plans. Single-use plans, right? So suppose that there is a kind of a pandemic time period, pandemic era. During the pandemic, you implemented lot of protocols. Those are now some organizations, mostly they are not using now. They were used only during the pandemic time, right? So those are single use plans, right? And the budget single use plans that commit resources to activities, project or programs. So budget can be available only for that activity. Suppose that you want to make sure that you install a water plant in a particular manufacturing plant, right? So you have to create a budget. So the budget is valid only for that installation. After the installation, you are not bothering about that budget, right? So budget becomes single use plan, right? Projects, one-time activities that have clear beginning and end options. Project management and project. Now, each and every project is a series of activities, but these activities, uh, there is a specific starting time and ending time. Once you start and end, then the project is over. You can repeat the project, same project in another phase, or else, think about another important project, right? So each and every project definitely will have a budget. The budgets and projects all are single use plans. Okay, right. So we are still talking about the planning, standing plans, examples are policies and procedures. Single use plans, Budget and projects are examples for single use plans, right? So we identified types of plan based on the time horizon, right? Shorter term, mid-term, and longer term. And the based on level of management and top level management to strategic planning, middle level managers do tactical planning, and bottom level managers do operational planning. And standalone plan, single use plan. Standalone plans are the plans that we consider as policies and procedures. Single use plans, examples are budgets and projects. Okay. Now, answering the question number three, what are the useful planning tools and techniques? Now, when you plan, there are tools and techniques that using because you have to forecast. Forecasting is one technique. So, that basically making assumptions about what will happen in the future. You are making a decision for the future. So, definitely you have to predict the future by making assumptions. That is what we call forecasting. There are qualitative forecasting measurements and also quantitative forecasting measurements, right? But all these forecasts ultimately are done by based on human judgments. So nowadays, what is happening is there are a lot of tools, techniques, emotional, artificial intelligence tools are used, experts apps are used to forecast, but the judgment interpretation finally done by people, right? Now, what are the useful planning tools? Contingency planning. Forecasting is one. You specifically forecast the future, and the other thing is contingency planning. What does it mean? Identify alternative course of actions that can be implemented to meet the needs of changing circumstances. You can forecast a future. Forecasting is a technique that you make plan today. So planning means you're making decisions about what to achieve and how to achieve in the future. One method of doing is forecasting, right? Forecasting. So for up to now, all years, we needed 5,000 people to produce 5 million output per year, right? Now we are going to increase 10 million. So we forecast for to implement or to produce 10 million, you have to double the number of people. So this you have to recruit 10,000 people. So that's a simple forecasting technique for your planning. So in your today's plan, you express achieve 10 million, recruit another additional 5,000 people. That's the plan for tomorrow based on forecasting. What is the contingent planning? Contingent planning means forecast. If the forecast doesn't work because of alternative happenings, now you forecast future based on a situation that you had earlier. But what will happen if the environment circumstances changes? Now Sri Lanka's circumstances changed three times during last 2 3 years. First, East attack, and that changed the the playground, right? Most of the plans of tourist sector and a lot of industries, right, actually went in vain. They were not useful. They could not do anything, right? They had to use some other contingent planning. And then COVID. So the hotels had a plan again after East attack recovery, a huge boom, but COVID came. So what happened then? They contingently changed the plans not to accommodate tourists but to accommodate converting the hotels into COVID treatment centers, right? So they changed their plans based on the contingencies. So the contingency means the situations expected situation changes and it creates alternative course of actions, right? So then what you're trying to do under contingent planning is when the circumstance change, when the course of actions are changing, and you change your plans also. right? If you do planning, changing your plans based on the circumstance, we call it a contingency planning, right? So definitely nowadays, each and every organization have to think about contingency planning because all the time environment changes rapidly based on unpredicted, even unthought, right? Circumstance. It can be a human error, it can be a human accident or human disaster, or else a natural disaster, natural circumstance, right? So contingency plans, another way of tool you use for planning. And then other plan setup is scenario planning, right? Now scenario planning sometimes can start because of contingencies, right? Scenario means you would expect some alternatives to happen in the future. And if one alternative and each and every alternative happens, then you would expect a long term existence of consequences of that particular happening, right? For an example, Sri Lanka. So we, after many years, we actually got into a trap of foreign debt. So many countries predicted the way that Sri Lanka, even the banks, IMF, World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and even some our economic analysts predicted the way that Sri Lanka obtained loan, definitely they have to suffer in the future, and that sustain. This is how they are going to suffer. That is a one momentum or one scenario of high depth. And they predicted if they control their high depth and then cushion against whatever the economic these negative impacts, then they could have enjoyed this sort of consequences based on that. Now, what Sri Lanka did was Sri Lanka did not actually undertook the advices given few years ago. They continued the momentum of risking the country, taking more debts, foreign debts, and also allowing corruption. So, what has happened today? One option has happened, one alternative has happened. What is that? Economic downturn. Now we are a bankrupted country. Now, based on this bankruptcy, Sri Lanka has to, right, surpass through a difficult time for a longer time period. These are the consequences. This is a one scenario. If Sri Lanka goes to bankruptcy, one scenario. If Sri Lanka control today and uh, go for strict measures, another scenario, right? If Sri Lanka just sell the country to foreigners, another scenario, right? So what managers has to do is managers has to use their experience, intuition, maturity, everything, and to predict different scenarios and longer term circumstances. Based on that, they have to plan. If scenario one happens, this is the planning. If scenario two happens, this is the planning. If scenario three happens, this is the planning. What is it? There are three contingency plannings based on scenarios, right? So this is what you call scenario planning, right? And then the benchmark. Another thing is benchmarking is basically you try to identify the best practices of planning where that has been successful in another context, right? So you use external comparisons to better evaluate current performance and identify possible actions for the future, right? You take, okay, in this country this happens and then they operated in this way. So Sri Lanka also surpassing through this sort of situation, so we also had to use this. So that is kind of a benchmark, right? So there was a a company that actually faced a difficult situation in other context, maybe it's India or Sri Lanka or somewhere else. But we are also surpassing the same difficulties. So they implemented these sort of practices. That is how they came out. Or we also have to follow those things exactly what that particular company did in that context. So we took it as a best practice, right? This is called using best practices in planning. We call it as a benchmarking, right? Okay. So some other methods would be staff planners. So coordinating the planning functions for the total organizations or one of its major components, possible communications gap between staff planners and line management. So what you're still we are talking about useful planning tools and techniques. This one mainly talks about staff planners. Staff planners means in organization there are people who have a lot of information that actually support for planning and also techniques and capabilities. So what organization have to do is you have to coordinate with all entities in the organization in the planning process using those uh, people in the planning process, right? Another tool is in planning, you participate and involve. Maybe you are doing, uh, rather you take the options from the top, you take the ideas from the bottom, coordinating with all people and go for external entities, get more information, and then do planning. That is we call participation and involvement, right? Now, this is how the participation and involvement build commitments to plan. So you see, defining objectives, determining the current status when developing options, identifying activities and implementing, right? So you get the support from all parties within the organization, right? So that's how I end the first session of planning. I asked main three questions: how managers do plan, right, and types of plans, and what are the tools and techniques used in planning. So I completed the planning, and the next session is about controlling. Thank you very much.